Imagine a boy from a poor family in a tiny Crimean town at the beginning of the 19th century drawing with charcoal on fences. He was almost arrested for hooliganism, but 30 years later, the Pope himself would buy his paintings. Hello everyone, this is Nina Chef, and today I'm going to tell you the complete story of Ivan Aivazovsky. Not just a genius who could paint the sea without even looking at it, but also a determined, persistent man, scandalously divorced, yet endlessly in love with his native Feodosia. And as always, you'll get nothing but the truth. Let's go. Where did Aivazovsky come from? Ivan Aivazovsky was born on July 29, 1817 in Feodosia, a small port town on the southeastern coast of Crimea with a population of just 3,500 people to an Armenian family. At birth, he was recorded in the church book as Avanes, son of Gevog Aivazyan. And it will be hard to understand his entire future path without knowing that he was Armenian. The Armenian colony in Crimea lasted over 600 years. In the 1770s, when Catherine II annexed the peninsula to Russia, Armenians were already living here in several communities. Feodosia was one of the main Armenian centers. The artist's father worked as a minor court official, while his mother made a living by taking on odd jobs. They did not live in poverty, but were constantly worried about the future. Childhood, the sea, violin, and walls. Avanes's first drawing teacher came into his life by pure chance. The architect Yakov Kok literally caught 13-year-old Aivazovsky on the street in Feodosia when he was drawing a ship with charcoal on the wall of someone else's house. Kok didn't scold the boy. With his architect's eye, he saw how accurately the boy conveyed perspective by intuition, even without any training. Kok decided that the talent was worth his efforts and began regularly giving the boy paper, pencils, and paints for drawing, which the artist's family, of course, couldn't afford. He taught the teenager the basics of composition, the laws of linear perspective, and copying by hand. This is how a truly fantastic chain of people began, selflessly helping a poor boy, which would literally push him to the top of the world. However, Koch understood that his modest abilities as an architect would not be enough to advance the young man. He personally went to Khaznachayev, the governor of Feodosia, and showed him Aivazovsky's drawings. The governor, being a highly educated man, he was part of the Razumaz circle and was friends with Pushkin, immediately saw a spark in the sketches and ordered that the boy be brought to him. When the 13-year-old Aivazovsky first appeared before the high-ranking official, he was given a small test. Khaznachayev asked the boy to copy several professional engravings and drawings from his personal collection. The result exceeded all his expectations. The teenager made the copy with astonishing accuracy and ease. Khaznachayev realized this boy was a real treasure. From that moment on, Khaznachayev took him under his personal patronage. It should be noted that in the first half of the 19th century in Russia, patronage of talent was not just considered prestigious, it was the highest marker of aristocracy, education, and state-mindedness. The era of the famous merchant patrons Tretyakov, Mamontov, Morozov had not yet arrived. Art was patronized exclusively by the noble and bureaucratic elite. Moreover, in 1820, the Imperial Society for the Encouragement of Artists was established. The society's goal was formulated at the state level as follows: to find natural talents within Russia, help them rise out of poverty, and turn them into masters capable of bringing glory to the empire. So don't be surprised by the series of incredible events that I'll tell you about a little later. Alongside painting, Avanes learned to play the violin. He taught himself, without a teacher, by ear. Street performers and rhapsodes at the market taught him the basics. He played the violin Eastern style, bracing it on his knee and singing along. Playing the violin gave Khaznachayev an idea of how to help the young man without hurting his parents' pride. He knew that Vanya played the violin by ear very well. The governor began regularly inviting the boy to his house, supposedly to entertain guests with music, but in reality, he paid for these performances and let him stay for dinner. Soon Khaznachayev took Avanes completely under his wing. He transferred him from the parish school to the district school, hired an art teacher, supervised his upbringing, and invited him to social gatherings. And his wife, Princess Khaznachayeva, taught the boy manners, which would soon be very useful to him. In 1829, Khaznachayev was appointed governor of Taurida, and he took Avanes with him to Simferopol, enrolling him in the gymnasium. Thus, a little boy from a poor Armenian family began his first steps up the ladder leading to the sky. Petersburg, the Academy and the first trials. A brief digression so you understand what Russia was like in the 1820s and 1830s. The Decembrist uprising had just ended, and Nicholas I was terribly frightened. Therefore, he made the stability of the monarchy his main goal, relying on repression and the secret police. Society itself was archaic and agrarian, with serfdom prevented the free market from developing. Censorship was so rampant that this period would later be called the Dark 7 Years. It was forbidden to criticize officials, serfdom, or even use words like progress or evolution in articles. Minister of Education Sergei Uvarov formulated the famous triad: orthodoxy, autocracy, nationality. This was the formula of conservatism. Russia is unique, it doesn't need European reforms and values, and stability is maintained by faith and the absolute power of the Tsar. And art, which spoke of the beauty and greatness of Russia, fit perfectly into this state goal. But at the same time, in 1837, the first railway was launched in Russia. For now, exclusively for the royal family between Petersburg and Tsarskoye Selo, the first factories and manufactories are being launched, where hired labor and steam engines are used. The foundation is being laid for the imminent emergence of a new class of people, super rich industrialists who have more money than they know what to do with and who will soon also become patrons of the arts. And at the same time, in response to censorship, rebellious art flourishes during this period. Late Alexander Pushkin, Mikhail Lermontov, and Nikolai Gogol, who, in allegorical form, describe the problems of society and satirize it. In 1833, when Avanes was 16 years old, Nicholas I himself ordered that the son of an Armenian from Feodosia be admitted to the Imperial Academy of Arts at the state's expense. How did this become possible? There is a story here, an incredible chain of people, each of whom passed the baton to the next at just the right moment. I'll tell you about it, it's very interesting. Kaznachev, despite his authority as a combat officer, had no connections in the artistic circles of Petersburg and was not considered an authority in art. Completely different connections were needed, and just then, Natalia Fyodorovna Narishkina arrived in Simferopol to see him. She was the daughter of the Russian General Governor Rostopchin, the very one who set fire to Moscow in 1812 before the French, and the wife of the Taurida governor. She was a socialite with extremely high-level connections in St. Petersburg. One day, at the reception hosted by Kaznachev, she was shown Avanes's works, and one drawing, Jews in the Synagogue, impressed her so much that she agreed to help. Narishkina wrote a letter to St. Petersburg, not just to anyone, but to a specific person whom she knew personally. This was Salvatore Tonci, an Italian portraitist in Russian service, a collegiate counselor. This is an important detail. He was not just a painter, but a government official with formal rank. Narishkina wrote him a letter, enclosed a drawing of Avanes in the envelope, and asked for help. Tonci, seeing the obvious talent in the drawing, immediately began to arrange for the boy to be sent straight to Rome for training and wrote an official petition to the minister of the court. A petition from a collegiate counselor was already a document that the academy was required to consider. None other than Prince Volkonsky himself, the minister of the imperial court and one of the most influential people in Russia, received Tonci's petition along with the drawing and an excerpt from Narishkina's letter. And he forwarded all of this to the president of the academy, but with a question like a true Russian official not used to wasting resources. Couldn't we take the boy to us first instead of sending him directly to Rome? The request from Volkonsky was received by Alexei Olenin, the president of the Academy of Arts, state secretary, historian, archaeologist, and a man of great authority. He looked at the drawing and wrote a detailed response. The young Aivazovsky, judging by his drawing, has an extraordinary talent for composition. And he suggested taking him on as a state-sponsored student, with an annual allowance of 600 rubles from His Majesty's office, equivalent to the salary of a good metropolitan official of the middle ranks or a senior teacher in St. Petersburg. After that, Volkonsky combined this recommendation and most humbly reported everything to the emperor himself. And on July 22, 1833, Nikolai I ordered to accept it. This whole process took less than 2 weeks. And this was in Russia in 1833, when just the road from 12 days by carriage. The request from Volkonsky to Olenin was on July 9. Olenin's agreement came on July 13. Nicholas I's resolution was on July 14 and 22. By the standards of the Russian Empire, that was lightning fast. Aivazovsky himself saw this as something magical. But of course, there was no magic. There were just a few people, each of whom didn't pass by at the right moment. And of course, the artist's undeniable talent was so obvious that the most influential people in Russia considered him a real discovery. That's why Aivazovsky believed all his life that he was guided by a kind guardian angel. In fact, that's how it was. Only these angels didn't have wings. On August 23, 1833, Ivan Gay Aivazovsky, as he was called then, arrived in St. Petersburg. Autumn was coming soon, and the northern capital would surprise him with an icy wind from the Neva. For a southerner from Crimea, it was a real climate shock. He would be sick the entire time he studied. Colds, cough, and a tendency to tuberculosis, as the Academy's attending physician wrote. That's also why he would very often throughout his whole life return to his native Feodosia. You need to understand what the Academy of Arts was at that time. It was not just a school of painting. It was a state institution with the strictest discipline, early wake-ups, mandatory prayers, meager food, and icy corridors. The students lived at the academy, received state-provided food and clothing, and painted for 12 hours a day. There was almost no free time. Aivazovsky joined the landscape class of Professor Maxim Vorobyov. A man who came from humble beginnings, achieved everything through hard work, and therefore knew how to appreciate true talent. Vorobyov immediately saw something special in his new student and treated him with fatherly warmth. Here, Aivazovsky made his first true friends. At the home of the collector Tomilov, who opened his gallery with Rembrandt, Uzin, and Bryulov for him. There, Aivazovsky met Glinka, Kukolnik, Kiprensky, and Orlovsky. In the evenings, he played the violin for them and earned their sincere love and affection. In 1835, 2 years after enrolling, Aivazovsky exhibited his work, Study of Air Over the Sea, for the first time and received a silver medal. And in 1836, he saw Pushkin in person for the first time. This happened at the Academy's September exhibition. Alexander Sergeyevich arrived with his wife, Natalia Nikolaevna. When he learned that he was a Crimean artist, Pushkin asked if he missed his homeland and if he was ill in the north. Aivazovsky remembered this conversation for the rest of his life. A few months later, Pushkin was killed in a duel. But the first successes at the Academy also had a dark side. The president of the Academy, Olenin, decided to assign the young Aivazovsky as an assistant to the famous French marine painter, Philippe Tanner, who had come to St. Petersburg at the personal invitation of Nicholas I to paint views of Russia. It seemed like good luck, but it depends on how you look at it. At this point, it's worth explaining how work was usually organized in the studios. There was always a master and apprentices in the studio. The apprentices usually did all the technical work. They stretched the canvas, mixed the paints, and primed the surface. The more advanced ones were even entrusted with painting the secondary details of the artwork. The master would complete the main parts and sign the work. And sometimes the apprentice was so good that the master would allow him to paint the entire picture, just coming in to put his signature on it. Apprentices did not have the right to put their signatures on paintings in the workshop. So Tanner discovered that Aivazovsky was exactly such an apprentice whose skill was comparable to that of his teacher. Tanner had a lot of work, so he asked for an assistant, and Olenin gave him the most talented landscape artist in the class, Guy Aivazovsky, and everything would have been fine. But Tanner turned out to be a real tyrant. He loaded Ivan with so much work that he simply had no time left for his own projects. Tanner forbade Aivazovsky from working independently, jealously guarding his own methods and not wanting the student to get distracted from his commissions or do anything of his own. However, in the summer of 1836, Aivazovsky, despite Tanner's prohibition, submitted 5 of his own paintings to the Academy's autumn exhibition, which he had secretly painted at night without his mentor's knowledge. And one of them, the Grand Roadstead in Kronstadt, received a silver medal for surpassing the works of the master himself. Enraged, Tanner, using his access to the emperor, personally complained to Nicholas I. He stated that Aivazovsky showed black ingratitude, deceived him, and exhibited his paintings bypassing the official academic rules. Nicholas I, who did not tolerate any rebellion, as you can imagine, without looking into the matter, ordered all of Aivazovsky's paintings to be removed from the exhibition. Can you imagine what that's like? Your first real success, a medal, public attention, and on the very same day, all of it disappears by order from above because of a complaint from a jealous mentor. Moreover, insubordination could lead to expulsion from the academy. But it was that very injustice that made him a hero. Petersburg took the side of our man against the French upstart. the fabulous Krylov came to the academy specifically to meet the young artist who had suffered. The poet Vasily Zhukovsky and the president of the academy, Alexei Olenin, also stood up for their own, and the students publicly shamed Tanner at the exhibition. In the end, Professor Zauerweit personally explained to the emperor what had happened, and Nicholas I, convinced of Aivazovsky's innocence, showed mercy. He ordered the removed painting to be brought to the palace, looked at it, and bought the entire series of the artist's early Kronstadt paintings. This was Aivazovsky's first sale, and complete respect for Aivazovsky and disgrace for Tanner, who lost all trust of the emperor, who greatly disliked when access to him was used for intrigue. Tanner was ostracized by the professional community as well. As a result, he ended his contract early and returned to France, and soon his former student would take his place as the chief marine artist of the empire. The Fleet and Crimea, the first real paintings. In 1836, Aivazovsky spent the summer on a training voyage aboard the ships of the Baltic Fleet. It was there that he first saw with his own eyes how a storm behaves at sea, how the rigging works, and what a battle with the waves looks like. He befriended sailors and officers, played violin for them, and listened to their stories. That summer became his first exposure to the sea, his first real experience of it, which he would carry throughout his entire career. In October 1837, just 4 years after enrolling, Aivazovsky graduated from the academy with a gold medal 2 years ahead of schedule. At the age of 20, according to the terms of the gold medal, he was entitled to a trip abroad at the government's expense, usually to Paris, the world capital of art. But first he went home to Feodosia and spent 2 years there, traveling around his native land. Kaznacheyev, now a senator, took him on a trip along the southern coast, Yalta, Gurzuf, the cliffs of Ayudag. Aivazovsky painted from morning till night, taking in the Crimean landscape. It was here, returning from the academic discipline of the academy to the real, living sea, that he began to tackle his main challenge. Let me clarify again that academism or classicism, which was taught at the academy, required very strict adherence to numerous rules about how and what was allowed to be painted. For example, there was a strict rule coming from European classicism. Depicting the sun's disk directly was considered bad form and technically impossible. You'd blind the viewer and paint couldn't show the true light. The sun's disk itself was always hidden behind a cloud, a rock, or a hill, showing only the radiating rays. Aivazovsky would lock himself in his studio for months, hardly receiving any guests, trying to solve this technical and artistic challenge. Is it possible to capture the sun, to make the viewer feel its warmth when looking at the painting? Aivazovsky was among the first Russian painters to break the sun taboo, painting the naked, blinding solar disk in works like Neapolitan Bay and the Ninth Wave, making the canvas appear to glow. In 1839, General Nikolai Revsky unexpectedly came to his house. He was the son of that very Revsky who led his sons into battle at Borodino and a close friend of Pushkin. It was to him that Pushkin dedicated The Prisoner of the Caucasus. Revsky was in charge of the Black Sea coastal line and was about to lead a landing operation on the Caucasian shores. At that time, Russia conducted numerous military operations in the Caucasus. Raevsky, come with me, he said. There's scenery there that no one has ever painted before. Aivazovsky was supposed to have already returned to the academy by that time, but he couldn't resist. He left with Raevsky without asking permission. Only from Taman, already on the road, did he write a letter to President Olenin asking to extend his leave. On the battleship Silistria under the command of Nakimov, he took part in the landing operation. Nearby was Lev Pushkin, the poet's younger brother, who recited his brother's poems in exchange for a portion of wine. Raevsky there, Aivazovsky met the Decembrists, Adevsky, Narishkin, and Laurer, who had been demoted to soldiers and exiled to the Caucasus. And this almost cost him his reputation. Raevsky quickly realized how dangerous such an acquaintance was. It would be a shame to ruin such a talent, so he urgently sent the artist to paint the Abkhazian shores. There, on the shores of Abkhazia, Aivazovsky watched a storm and the pursuit of a Circassian boat by a Russian ship from a mountain using a spyglass. And later, at the request of Zvamba, an Abkhaz officer and friend, he ransomed 2 kidnapped girls from captivity who were freed from the captured ship. These impressions later inspired the painting Storm on the shores of Abkhazia. After 2 Black Sea raids, Aivazovsky returned a completely different man. The experience of being on ships, when he saw battles with his own eyes and watched the crew changing the rigging of the sailing ships, gave him a completely unique perspective. At the academy, he was taught to paint from life. That's why classical Russian marine painting before Aivazovsky was sparse and dull. This is what pushed him to search for new painting techniques. On the Caucasian coast, in real battle conditions, it was impossible to sit on the shore with an easel. It was then that the artist developed his famous method. He would make only quick pencil sketches in his notebook and paint the actual picture later in his studio from memory. And our memory is always richer than reality. And this gave his paintings incredible dynamism. The sea in them came alive, it stopped being static, and turned from a simple depiction of nature into a story told by the artist, who had seen everything with his own eyes. There is a myth that when Aivazovsky returned from Crimea, Nicholas I immediately bought the painting Landing at Subashi, but that's not quite true. Landing at Subashi, the main painting resulting from the Caucasus expedition, was painted by Ivan Aivazovsky right in Feodosia, and he personally gave it to Raevsky as a gift. On the back of the canvas, the artist wrote a touching inscription, "Belongs to the eldest in the Raevsky family, not to be sold." At that time, he still signed his paintings with the shortened student form of his name, Guy, derived from Aivazovsky. Today, this masterpiece is kept in the Samara Regional Art Museum. After returning to St. Petersburg, Aivazovsky displayed 7 marine paintings at the autumn exhibitions, impressing high society with their documentary accuracy. Naval officers came to the exhibition specifically to assess the accuracy of the rigging, sails, and proportions of the ships, and they were amazed by the flawless depiction. Aivazovsky brought to the capital an incredible, almost documentary record of what was happening on the Black Sea. Photography did not exist at that time, and such paintings were the only way to create an artistic chronicle of events. And it turned out that the young Aivazovsky simply had no equal in this. And his experiments with direct sunlight led to his most distinctive skill, the depiction of sunlight shining through translucent waves. Neither before nor after Aivazovsky has anyone in the world managed to achieve such perfection in this craft. As mentioned, the Russian Empire was active in the Black Sea and Caucasus operations during those years. Society and Tsar Nicholas I himself were eager to glorify the victories of Russian arms and the power of the national fleet. Aivazovsky brought back from Crimea not just landscapes, but an artistic chronicle of these victories. The paintings looked patriotic, grand, and heroic. It was a jackpot of the highest quality marine art, perfectly fitting the state order. Nikolai was absolutely delighted and bought all 7 paintings for an incredible 3,000 rubles. And having an Aivazovsky painting at home instantly became not just fashionable, but prestigious, since even the sovereign himself was buying from him. And the young 22-year-old artist suddenly became a real star in artistic circles. And on September 23, 1839, Aivazovsky received his graduation certificate from the Academy, his first rank of the 14th class and personal nobility. You may remember that in Russia at that time there was the famous table of ranks established by Peter I. It was a unique system of social mobility. All officials started from the lowest 14th rank regardless of their origin. Even Peter I himself started from it. And for personal merit, people advanced up the career ladder. At the top in the first rank were generals and ministers. Your nobility, that was exactly how people were supposed to address Aivazovsky now, according to his rank. Be patient, soon you will find out what rank the artist eventually reached. Personal nobility, meaning the kind that couldn't be inherited, was automatically granted to everyone who received the lowest 14th rank. Hereditary nobility, which could be passed on to children, could be obtained by reaching the 8th rank, collegiate assessor, or your high well-born. Will Aivazovsky reach it? Italy, the birth of a master. And in July 1840 at last came that very trip abroad that Aivazovsky was entitled to for his gold medal. Aivazovsky was given a document authorizing his trip abroad for further improvement. But before leaving, he achieved the most important thing. The Academy agreed to send money to his mother in Feodosia every quarter. He entered the carriage only after ensuring his mother would be cared for. 2 artists, Aivazovsky and his friend Sternberg, worked in Italy for 4 years. Venice, Florence, Naples, Sorrento, Rome. They studied Raphael, Titian, Botticelli right in the Uffizi Gallery, in the most prestigious museum in Italy at that time, which would soon greatly surprise him. And in Venice, he met Gogol himself. Their meeting happened completely by chance. While visiting fellow countrymen living in Venice, Aivazovsky stopped by to see his acquaintances. In the memoirs, the house of the writer Ivan Panayev is mentioned. where Gogol was together with his friend Nikolai Botkin. Aivazovsky later recalled that he didn't recognize the writer at first. Seeing a stranger in the room, the artist quietly asked the host who he was. He whispered back, "That's Gogol." The author of the Inspector General heard the whisper, quickly approached the shy young man, and shook his hand warmly, regretting they hadn't met sooner. It turned out that Gogol was already a passionate admirer of the young marine artist's work. Later, they traveled together to Florence and then to Rome. In Rome, Gogol took the young Aivazovsky and Sternberg under his wing. They used to go together for breakfast at the famous artistic Cafe Greco, which still exists in Rome to this day. They strolled among the Roman ruins and gathered in the evenings at the writer's apartment on Felici Street. It was here that Aivazovsky first dropped the letter G from his surname. In Italian, the initial letter G was pronounced unnaturally, in an unfamiliar way. The Italians literally had to twist their tongues, and the surname sounded awkward. That's why he dropped the G and began calling himself Aivazovsky. The Italians pronounced it easily, melodiously, and the surname instantly acquired a harmonious, almost native musical tone for the Apennine Peninsula. At the very first major Roman exhibition, 3 paintings by Aivazovsky, Neapolitan Night, The Storm, and Chaos, the creation of the world, caused a sensation. The newspapers exclaimed that no one before had depicted water, light, and air so vividly. The painting Chaos, the creation of the world, depicted a biblical scene: darkness, a raging ocean, and divine light breaking through the clouds. When he learned about it, Pope Gregory XVI wished to see the canvas in person and possibly purchase it for the Vatican. But the cardinals decided to conduct an inspection because in Christian iconography, especially in Catholic tradition, there was a strict prohibition against depicting God the Father as a specific old man on a cloud. But Aivazovsky depicted not a person, but a luminous phenomenon taking the shape of a figure. The papal experts ultimately considered it not heresy, but a brilliant allegory. The Creator manifests through light. He is that very light. They interpreted this as the breath of the Divine Spirit, Spiritus Sanctus, hovering over the water. The Pope decided to buy the painting, but the 24-year-old Ivan Aivazovsky acted more wisely. Deeply flattered by such an honor, he flatly refused to take money from the pontiff and simply gave him Chaos as a gift. When he found out about this, Gogol jokingly said to the artist, "Well done, Vanya. You came, little man, from the distant shores of the Black Sea to Rome and immediately stirred up chaos in the Vatican, hinting at the name of the painting." Can you imagine the level of publicity? The Pope himself acknowledges the artist's skill. It's impossible to imagine a higher recognition in the Catholic world. The works of a very young Russian artist ended up in the Vatican Gallery alongside the paintings of the world's greatest masters. It was an unprecedented success, highly unusual, practically a sensation. Soon his paintings would be purchased by the King of Naples and several European magnates. The famous English marine painter Turner, whom many consider the father of modern landscape painting, was so impressed that he wrote poems about Aivazovsky's Neapolitan Night and came to meet the artist in person. My next video will be about Turner, so subscribe so you don't miss it. This is a special companion video, and it will be very interesting for us to compare these two artists, the two most famous marine painters in history. You will see how different they are, and I hope you will come to love Turner as much as I do. What captivated these people? Aivazovsky discovered the main rule. He didn't copy nature from life as most landscape painters did. He painted from memory, and his memory was absolute. He could sit on the shore for hours, closely observing the sea, and then, in his studio, reproduce the light, the movement of the water, and the shades of the sky with such accuracy that viewers would ask if he had painted it right on the ship. Depicting water is actually one of the most difficult practices in painting. There were no photographs yet, and artists couldn't just freeze the waves to study them and remember their shape and color to convey their endless movement. They had to spend hours observing the constantly changing sea to catch the patterns of light reflecting off the waves. Their shapes, sequences, sizes, but most importantly, their transparency. Very few managed to achieve photographic realism. I would even say that almost no one did before Aivazovsky. And he also discovered that very light, not just light on objects, but light as the main character of the painting, depicting it, telling its own story. Aivazovsky's light is his play with water, it's his personal invention, his signature, his contribution to painting. In 1842, Aivazovsky exhibited his works at the Louvre in Paris and was the only Russian artist there. The French Academy awarded him a gold medal. Now he had a gold medal from the Pope, a gold medal from the French Academy, and the admiration of Turner, and he was only 25 years old. Almost at the very end of Aivazovsky's stay in Europe, he had an incident that became perhaps the artist's greatest PR success, although it involved a terrible risk to his life. He went to England, and then from England he returned to France again. The ship on which the artist was sailing got caught in a terrible storm in the Bay of Biscay, a place that already had a bad reputation among sailors because of its unpredictable and destructive storms. The storm was so strong that the ship became nearly uncontrollable. Waves flooded the deck, the masts were cracking, and the passengers were saying their goodbyes to life in panic. As Aivazovsky himself later recalled, while the others were crying and praying, he, seized by professional excitement, stood on the deck and memorized the madness of the elements with all his attention. How the foam swirled, how the color of the water changed under the storm clouds, and how the light broke. The ship, however, miraculously survived and, badly battered, somehow limped to the nearest port. However, for some time it was considered lost at sea. While the ship was considered missing at sea, information leaked to the European press that a ship had sunk in the Bay of Biscay during a violent storm, and on board was a young and incredibly talented Russian marine artist, Guy Vazovsky. The news was instantly picked up by the major newspapers of Paris, London, and then St. Petersburg. Journalists began writing obituaries, lamenting that the world of art had lost a genius who had barely had time to reveal his potential. At the St. Petersburg Academy of Arts, friends and teachers were already mourning Ivan. And suddenly, after some time, alive, healthy, and unharmed, Aivazovsky personally appears in Paris. The public of that time adored such stories, resurrection from the dead. When it turned out that the artist was alive, attention to him increased many times over. From just a talented graduate, he turned into a news hero overnight. People talked about him on the streets, his name was on everyone's lips. The Parisian public was eager to see in person the man whom all the leading newspapers had buried. After this story, no one could accuse Aivazovsky anymore of inventing his storms while sitting in a cozy studio. The audience understood that this artist had truly looked death in the face. He himself had been inside that hell. Each of his storm paintings came to be seen not as fantasy, but as an eyewitness document. There is a common legend that once Aivazovsky came to a Parisian bank to receive his salary, which was being sent to him from Russia, but the clerk did not like his identification. And then, supposedly, Aivazovsky immediately drew a seascape for him on paper, and the clerk realized that he was facing the very same Aivazovsky from the newspapers. Exactly the same legend exists about Picasso and about Dali and a couple of other artists. It's a beautiful story, but not a realistic one, because no bank in the world would give you money for a drawing on paper, not even in the 19th century, after a scandal in the newspapers. Return to Russia, academician, painter of the fleet, fiancé. In 1844, Aivazovsky's European tour was in full swing, but then a real setback happened. One of the popular Parisian newspapers published a laudatory article about the grand success of the Russian marine painter. The journalist, wishing to flatter Aivazovsky and emphasize France's hospitality, added from himself the phrase, "The Russian artist, deeply touched by the warmth and attention of Parisians, intends to stay in France for a long time, and possibly even settle here forever." In Nicholas's Russia of the 19th century, such a seemingly innocent line in a foreign newspaper was not just a piece of social gossip, but a political sentence. Do you remember how strict Nicholas I's control over mines was? So not returning from abroad was considered equivalent to treason. If Nicholas I or the leadership of the Academy of Arts had decided that their scholarship holder, on whom the state had spent a huge amount of money, had decided to escape to the decaying and revolutionary Paris, Aivazovsky would have instantly lost everything. Ivan was terribly frightened, so he decided to act preemptively and immediately wrote an official petition to St. Petersburg, addressed to the leadership of the Academy, in which he fervently denied the rumors and asked for permission to end his trip 2 years early and return to Russia. He packed his suitcases and, as soon as the permission was granted, hurriedly left for his homeland. This seemingly hasty step turned out to be a brilliant tactical decision. In St. Petersburg, this patriotic gesture was appreciated. Instead of disgrace, Aivazovsky was welcomed as a hero. The return was triumphant. Russia had regained its nearly lost genius, who had miraculously conquered the water element and returned home despite the cunning traps set for him in Europe. Almost like Odysseus. Bryulov, then the leading artist of Russia, whose Pompeii had amazed all of Europe, personally organized a dinner in Aivazovsky's honor in his studio, and went to the academy to demand that his heroic colleague be immediately awarded. Already on September 13, 1844, the Academy unanimously awarded Aivazovsky the title of academician at the age of 27. At the same time, the Naval Ministry appointed him as the painter of the main naval headquarters, the official artist of the Russian fleet, that is, the chief marine painter of Russia. Now he had the right to wear a naval uniform. Aivazovsky thus became a state artist. This position did not provide any salary, but it gave him the right to attend all naval maneuvers with access to the highest military circles. And this actually meant that Aivazovsky received a monopoly on the largest and fabulously expensive government commissions. Emperor Nikolai II immediately commissioned him to paint views of all the main Russian military ports and fortresses of the Baltic and Black Seas, as well as the city of Sevastopol. For each of these paintings, the Naval Department and the Tsar himself would pay the artist huge fees from the treasury. In his best years, his income would reach 70,000 rubles, making him the wealthiest resident of Feodosia and the largest landowner in Crimea. For comparison, the annual salary of an ordinary professor at the Academy of Arts was no more than 1,500 silver rubles, while a cow or a good horse cost between 5 and 15 rubles. As you can see, Aivazovsky was certainly enterprising, which of course does not diminish his talent in any way. At the same time, he submits a petition to officially change his name from Gege Vazovsky to Aivazovsky, since that is how he is now known throughout the world. In Russia, they were ready to call him whatever name they pleased, since he was already seen as a modern genius. However, instead of settling in St. Petersburg, as any ambitious artist would have done, he went to Feodosia. Why, you may ask? After all, there's a sea in St. Petersburg too, but the northern sea is different. Gray, rainy St. Petersburg was stingy with sunlight, and the artist needed light as the main character in his paintings. Such light also existed in his native Feodosia, and in 1845 Aivazovsky sailed in the Aegean Sea. Not with just anyone, but with Grand Duke Konstantin Nikolaevich himself, the son of the emperor, as part of the expedition of the renowned Russian navigator Fyodor Litke. And he visited Istanbul, which was still called Konstantinovsky Popol at that time. The city made a stunning impression on the artist. Its unique geographical location, the Bosphorus, the Golden Horn, the minarets, the blend of Asian and European cultures. Aivazovsky fell in love with Istanbul and began painting it a lot. The arrival of the main artist of the Russian fleet was reported to the young Sultan Abdülmecid II. The Sultan was the same age as Aivazovsky. He was about 23 years old. He received a good European education, loved Western art, and actively tried to modernize his empire. The Sultan wished to see the master in person, and soon a court audience was soon held with full honors. The Sultan was amazed at how quickly and vividly Aivazovsky captured the fleeting light of the Bosphorus on canvas. He immediately commissioned several major works from the artist and, as a sign of the highest respect, awarded him the Nishan Iftikhar Order, the Order of Glory, the highest state honor of the Ottoman Empire at that time. Despite the fact that the two empires were at odds in the Black Sea, Sultan Abdülmecid I went down in history as the builder of a luxurious new residence on the Bosphorus, the Dolmabahce Palace, which was meant to outshine Versailles. You may have seen it if you've been to Istanbul. To decorate the interiors, the Sultan bought the best European art, and when the palace was completed, Aivazovsky's paintings took a place of honor there. The Sultan's heirs continued his work. In 1874, Sultan Abdulaziz commissioned Aivazovsky for 30 more paintings and awarded him the highest order of Osmania, giving him a fortune in gold equivalent to several tens of thousands of rubles. But in addition to bags of gold, Sultan Abdulaziz presented the artist with the Order of Osmania, second class. It was not just a mark of distinction, but a masterpiece of jewelry. The star and badge of the order were encrusted with large diamonds. Just the value of the precious stones on this award was equal to the price of several fine estates. Today, these 30 paintings are a national treasure of Turkey. But just 20 years later, the story of Aivazovsky's relationship with Turkey would end very bloodily. In 1948, at the age of 31, Aivazovsky got married. His chosen one was Julia Grafs, the daughter of an Englishman who was the court physician of Nicholas I. They had 4 daughters, but this marriage turned out to be unhappy. There are several versions of what happened, and to be honest, both sides share responsibility. Biographers of the Soviet era portrayed Julia as a capricious lady who dreamed of St. Petersburg balls and chafed at life in provincial Feodosia. But there is another version, and it is documented. Julia wrote personally to Alexander II. Describing her husband's behavior, she spoke of his jealous and domineering character, and that he abandoned her in autumn. What is the truth? Most likely both. Aivazovsky was a passionate and demanding man, deeply attached to his Feodosia, almost like a daughter. Yulia wanted a different life for herself and her daughters. They separated after 12 years of marriage. It was an official divorce, which was rare at that time. The daughters stayed with their mother. Aivazovsky paid alimony and never spoke badly about the separation in public. He would rebuild his personal life, but more on that later. The ninth wave. And it was during this period in 1850 that he painted what became his most famous work, the ninth wave. I want to explain what this is. The ninth wave is a maritime term. According to an old sailor's belief, in a series of waves during a storm, every ninth wave is the highest and most destructive. Aivazovsky knew about this superstition, and he painted dawn after a terrible storm. The sun is just rising, the air is still pink and golden, and on the wreckage of the mast, several people are clinging on with their last strength. Right above them is a huge wave, looming over them like a mountain. Take a close look at this painting. What makes it brilliant is the light. Aivazovsky painted dawn, and this light makes the scene not tragic but filled with hope. The people are alive, the sun is rising. Will they survive or not? The artist does not give an answer. He suggests that the viewer imagine it for themselves. The painting measures 2.2 by 3.3 meters. When it was displayed at the exhibition, people stood in front of it for hours. The Hermitage bought it, and it is still there to this day. Go see it if you get the chance. The ninth wave was painted in one sitting, in just a few days. In general, he painted small paintings in 2 or 3 days and large ones in a week. This amazed his contemporaries and angered his jealous rivals. They said he painted hastily and carelessly. He didn't paint the sea from life, he remembered it. Feodosia, the Baltic, Naples, Abkhazia, the Bay of Biscay, all of this was stored in his mind as if in a notebook. And when he needed to paint a storm, he would close his eyes, pull out the right slide, and easily recreate it, because he had seen it with his own eyes many times. The Crimean War. The artist on the besieged bastion. In 1853, Russia, seeking to control the strategically important Bosporus Strait, attacked the Ottoman Empire and defeated the Turkish army in the first battle. But France and Great Britain immediately joined the campaign, not wanting Russia to gain strength in the Black Sea. The Russian fleet used sailing ships, but the Allied fleet had steam-powered vessels. It doesn't depend on the wind, it's more maneuverable, and it's also equipped with the latest cannons firing explosive shells, while Russian cannons were still shooting iron balls that just made holes in ships. The technological gap was so huge that the Russian fleet was simply swept away, and Admirals Kornilov and Nakhimov had no choice but to sink their own fleet at the entrance to Sevastopol Bay, just to create an underwater barrier against the enemy fleet. And the siege of Sevastopol began. For Aivazovsky, this war became a personal tragedy. His native Crimean Sea became a theater of military operations. At this time, he created several series of works depicting naval battles. At the end of May 1854, Aivazovsky personally organized an exhibition of his battle paintings in the building of the Sevastopol Naval Assembly. The artist's goal was purely patriotic, to boost the morale of the sailors of the Black Sea Fleet. He brought his best canvases, celebrating the triumph of Russian arms, including a fresh, newly painted work, Sign Up Battle, dedicated to the defeat of the Turkish squadron by Admiral Nakhimov 6 months earlier. The exhibition was a tremendous success. The halls were packed from morning till evening. Officers, sailors, and soldiers who already understood that a clash with the combined forces of England and France was inevitable came to see these paintings. Nakhimov and Kornilov personally thanked Aivazovsky. There is a legend that Aivazovsky painted right in besieged Sevastopol, but that's not entirely true. The famous 349-day siege of the city began half a year after the exhibition. But Aivazovsky really did come to the city, although he was in the besieged city for only a few days. He really did go to the front lines, made sketches, and talked with the defenders under the constant roar of artillery. It was under these impressions that he began work on his famous painting, The Siege of Sevastopol. However, Aivazovsky was not allowed to stay. Vice Admiral Kornilov, the head of the city's defense, believed that putting the life of the empire's main marine artist at mortal risk would be a crime against Russian art. Kornilov literally ordered Aivazovsky to leave Sevastopol immediately, stating that the artist's task was to survive and preserve the city's heroic deeds on canvas for history. Aivazovsky obeyed and left. And literally a few days after this conversation, Admiral Kornilov himself died on Malakov Kurgan from a fatal wound caused by a cannonball. In 1856, the war ended, perhaps with the most shameful defeat in Russia's history. Russia lost the right to keep a fleet in the Black Sea and became a pariah on the international stage as an aggressor who violated the world order. And none other than Aivazovsky will help the country return to Europe's highest circles. The defeat in the war was a shock for Russian society, clearly demonstrating the backwardness and dysfunction of conservative ideas in the modern realities. A year before the defeat, Nikolai I dies of the flu, and his educated and progressive son Alexander II ascends to the throne. He understands that Russia's technological lag leaves it no chance for revenge, and the only way forward is diplomacy. Already in 1961, he will accomplish perhaps the most important act in Russian history. He will abolish serfdom. And this will become a powerful impetus for the development of the country's economy and social policy. For now, we need to consider how to restore the country's reputation. In 1857, just a year after the defeat in the Crimean War, the Paris International Exhibition was being organized in Paris. It was an exhibition of achievements from all over the world, where countries set up their pavilions and showcased their power and beauty. The Eiffel Tower would be built for one of these exhibitions in 1889. Alexander II faces the extremely difficult task of breaking Russia's international isolation. And he decides to use what is now called soft power. Crimeau in Paris, 1897 Crimeau in 1997 in Parisian circles, and it has nothing to do with politics, industry, or military affairs. And such a Crimeau in Russia was Ivan Crimeau in Crimeau in 1997 Crimeau, a year of creative use by the choir of aviation Magrium Libioldas. He is assigned the role of cultural ambassador. Especially for this exhibition, Aivazovsky departed from his usual genre and created an ambitious cycle of 4 paintings, which he called The Wealth of Russia. These included canvases dedicated to winter landscapes, steppes, and gold mines. Of these, only one painting has survived, Winter Epos on the Road. The goal was to show that despite the defeat, Russia has enormous resources and is still culturally invaluable. And contrary to all fears, Aivazovsky was received in Paris not as a representative of an aggressor country, but as a genius of global stature. The artist's authority practically broke through and pushed Russia into the highest cultural circles, and his paintings caused a real sensation. An almost lost Russian genius, returning to Paris with a new statement from a vast and foreign country. Critics and the public did not just receive Aivazovsky favorably, he was the first among all Russian artists to be awarded the Legion of Honor, the highest award in Paris, France. Aivazovsky's trip to Paris became a brilliant victory for Russian cultural diplomacy. Flourishing in recognition. After Aivazovsky's triumph in Paris, his career soared rapidly. Since the 1860s, Aivazovsky has been a living legend in Russia and one of the richest artists in the country. His paintings are bought and his exhibitions attract crowds. The artist was awarded many orders, and in 1864, at the age of 47, he was granted hereditary nobility. He lived between Feodosia and St. Petersburg and regularly traveled abroad. In 1869, he took part in the grand opening of the Suez Canal, one of the greatest engineering events of the 19th century, which connected the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. Aivazovsky became the first artist to depict this canal on canvas. It is necessary to explain what the Suez Canal was in 1869. It was a revolution. Before the canal, ships from Europe to Asia had to sail around Africa, spending months on the journey. After it took only weeks. This changed trade, politics, the map of the world, and completely shifted the balance of power. All the world's leaders came to the opening, monarchs, presidents, ministers, and among the official guests was the Russian artist Aivazovsky. In 1870, Aivazovsky received the rank of actual state councillor, the 4th most important civil rank in Russia. This is similar to a major general in the army. From that moment on, Aivazovsky became Your Excellency. In 1874, an event took place that the artist himself considered one of the most important in his life. The Florence Academy of Fine Arts asked him to paint a self-portrait for the very Uffizi Gallery, where he had studied the works of the great Renaissance masters. Where Raphael, Titian, and Rubens are displayed, a self-portrait, do you understand what that means? The Uffizi Gallery wanted to have an image of Aivazovsky himself, painted by his own hand. It's like getting your own star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Aivazovsky became the second Russian artist to be awarded this great honor. The first was Kiprensky. There will definitely be a video about him as well. Subscribe so you don't miss it. It will be very interesting. Aivazovsky loved his hometown of Theodosia, but in the 1880s the city suffered from a severe drought. Clean drinking water was brought there in barrels on carts, and it cost a lot of money. But on the territory of the artist's country estate Subash, there were the purest fresh water springs. Seeing how his fellow countrymen were suffering, Aivazovsky did something unprecedented. He officially appealed to the city authorities with a statement. Unable to bear witnessing the terrible fact of the lack of water any longer, I grant Feodosia in perpetual ownership 50,000 buckets a day of clean water from my own Subash spring. At his own expense, the artist laid a multi-kilometer water pipeline into the city, and in the center of Feodosia, he built a luxurious fountain from which every resident could take water for free. A silver mug hung by the fountain inscribed, "To the health of Aivazovsky." He also opened an art school in Feodosia, the first in the region, where he taught young artists for free. He also loved Crimean wines and champagne very much. Before the lavish dinners he often hosted, he would ask the servants to wash off the original paper labels from the bottles. Instead, he would stick clean pieces of thick paper on them, on which he would personally, in advance, sketch small seascapes with watercolor or quick strokes of brown sepia paint. A storm, calm, a moonlit night, each wine was given the name of a painting depending on the character of the wine. For example, a light sparkling wine would go under the ironic label "From Calm to Hurricane," while strong or aged wines were proudly called the Ninth Wave. The guests were absolutely thrilled by this, and the empty bottles with the original miniature labels became souvenirs that were carefully taken from Feodosia to St. Petersburg and Moscow. The later period, the second love, and the final masterpieces. In 1982, Aivazovsky was already 65 years old. He met Anna Nikitichna Sarkisova, a young widow of a Feodosia merchant. She was just over 20. It looked like a scandal, but it turned out to be serious. They got married, and Anna became his faithful companion for the last 18 years of his life. They say it was she who created that cozy, warm atmosphere in their Feodosia home, where the artist worked with incredible productivity until his last days. During these years, Aivazovsky's style began to change. His early paintings were solemn, almost theatrical, with clear silhouettes of ships and dramatic storms. His later works became softer, more misty, and more lyrical. The light became diffused and the colors more transparent. The maturity of his life is directly reflected in the artist's paintings. They become calmer, more balanced, refined, and less dramatic. In 1885, Aivazovsky was granted the rank of Privy Councillor, the third most important rank in the Russian Empire, equivalent to a lieutenant general. And in the 1890s, a wave of massacres of Armenians swept through the Ottoman Empire. It was a mass extermination of people, essentially a genocide, long before the genocide of 1915, but of the same nature. For the Armenian Aivazovsky, this was a deeply personal blow. The artist's reaction was fierce and demonstrative. He took all the Turkish orders that the sultans had showered him with for decades, separated the medals from their ribbons, went to the seashore in Feodosia, and threw the medals into the water from the spears. He sent the ribbons to the Turkish king, to the consul, with a letter. "Tell your bloody ruler that I threw his awards into the sea, and let him do the same with my paintings. I do not regret it." And here I will explain another interesting detail. The orders themselves were divided into two parts back then. The metal part, the cross, the star, or the medal, is the material value. The Sultan's orders were encrusted with diamonds and made of pure gold. The fabric ribbon is a symbol of honor, recognition, and connection between the monarch and the one he has awarded. The colors of the ribbon were personally approved by the Sultan and symbolized state recognition. When Aivazovsky removed the precious orders and returned only the empty ribbons to the Sultan, he committed a double diplomatic insult. The artist showed that the Sultan's material generosity and his gold meant nothing to him and were literally worthy of lying on the seafloor. And by returning the ribbons, Abazovsky as if threw back at the Sultan his very recognition and honor stained with blood. Before that, he also staged a performance by tying the awards to his yard dog and walking with it past the consulate. Dogs are considered unclean animals in Islam. To hang the highest state order, which bore the symbols of the Sultan's power, around a dog's neck was an absolute deliberate religious and political desecration. In other words, Abazovsky used every means available to him to express his pain and attitude toward this massacre. The Sultan's reaction was furious. He ordered all of Aivazovsky's paintings to be removed from the palace, but he did not dare to destroy them. By that time, the artist's paintings were already worth a fortune, so he simply hid them in a back room. There they would remain for almost 30 years until the palace was nationalized by the new Turkish Republic in 1922. The new government would conduct a strict inventory, and Aivazovsky's paintings would be recognized as a national treasure of the new Turkey. A national treasure of the new Turkey. During the pogroms, Aivazovsky dramatically shifted his painting themes. Instead of his usual romantic views of Istanbul, he painted a series of grim, accusatory works, such as the pogrom of Armenians in Trebizond and Armenians thrown from ships into the Marmara Sea. Few people have seen these paintings since the artist didn't exhibit them. Today, I'm showing them to you. By the end of his life, Aivazovsky found himself in a paradoxical situation. On one hand, he was considered a living god of the sea, an unquestioned authority favored by three emperors. On the other hand, in artistic circles where the Peredvizhniki and realism were already in full swing, and Impressionism and the avant-garde were long challenging classicism, he was considered an anachronism, an outdated romantic who painted the same thing over and over. The well-known critic Vladimir Stasov wrote that Aivazovsky was mired in cliches and endlessly repeated himself. In 1896, the fourth emperor, Nicholas II, granted Aivazovsky the highest rank of his career, actual privy councillor. This was the second highest rank in the table of ranks. Aivazovsky was 78 years old at the time. A poor Armenian boy became your excellency. No Russian artist before or after Aivazovsky has ever managed to repeat this path. The last day, on May 2, 1900, Ivan Konstantinovich died in Feodosia. Despite his advanced age, Aivazovsky felt energetic. He spent the whole day in his studio. The artist was working on a new large canvas, which was meant to glorify the feat of the Greek rebel Konstantinos Kanaris, who blew up the Turkish flagship near the island of Chios. There is a myth that Aivazovsky died while working, but that's just another fabrication. By the end of the day, Aivazovsky had managed to almost completely paint the central, most difficult part of the composition. A powerful explosion of a warship engulfed in flames and smoke, debris flying apart, and the dark night water. Feeling a bit tired, the artist decided to take a break and finish the painting the next morning. He went to rest, and during the night, while he was sleeping, he suffered a sudden brain hemorrhage, a stroke. Death came instantly and without suffering. A wet canvas remained on the easel in the empty studio. If you look closely at the painting, the explosion of the ship, which remains unfinished today in the Feodosia Gallery, you can clearly see the boundary. The fire, smoke, and water are painted with the filigree precision characteristic of Aivazovsky, while the edges of the canvas and the outlines of the mountains are only lightly sketched with quick brushstrokes. Aivazovsky lived his life as a true artist and left this world in the same way, putting down his brush at the very moment when the paint on his last seascape masterpiece had not even dried yet. The whole city gathered at his funeral, Armenians and Russians, Greeks and Tatars, sailors and officials. On the slab at his grave near the Armenian church, there is an inscription in Armenian. Born immortal, he left behind an immortal memory. In 60 years of work, Aivazovsky painted about 6,000 paintings. He participated in more than 120 exhibitions and was a member of the Academies of St. Petersburg, Rome, Paris, Florence, Amsterdam, and Stuttgart. He received orders from Russia, France, Greece, Turkey, and Germany. Paintings that were sold for thousands of rubles during his lifetime now go for tens of millions of dollars at auctions. His monumental painting, The Survivors, was sold at the Sotheby's auction in London for a record $5.5 million, but it's not even about the money. The thing is, when you look at his Ninth Wave or Black Sea, you feel something that there are no words for. That is his true legacy. Not the canvases, not the gold medals, but that feeling when you see the sea the way our memories preserve it, and you realize that it is truly alive and real. Friends, I created this channel to tell you about art in a simple and engaging way. I love doing this. And every new video is my little project for which I need to build an interesting narrative, select up to 500 photos, arrange them correctly, and add captions. It's a huge amount of work, but quality is more important to me than quantity. I'll keep doing this, but your support would be really helpful to me. Please become a sponsor of the channel here on YouTube, or even sign up for even the smallest subscription on Boosty or Patreon. I'll leave the links in the description. Let's create the most knowledgeable art community in the world. And thank you for watching.